Omnibus prelude, the last days of Socrates. You are breathless, but still you run. Even cobblestones throw you off balance. Your feet ache, but on you run. Others jostle around you, and you almost stumble, but you can't because it's chasing you. A wave of sharp beats moves over the ancient pavement behind you. You have to run faster. You glance back over your shoulder and you see them. The bulls are coming. Suddenly, fear overwhelms fatigue and you rocket ahead of a few competitors. As you come around the corner, you cast a look backward. The wall of bulls is steps behind. You search for the bull ring ahead of you. You'll never make it. You feel a sharp push in the small of your back, and you almost stumble onto the pavement. One beast seems to have his sights set on you. You bail out, driving from the main road one of the even narrower alleyways. Your body skids along the stones. You are battered. Your lungs gasp for oxygen, but at least you are safe. You hear the distant roar of the Pamplona crowd in the distance as the bulls enter the ring. But you hear another, closer sound behind you in the alleyway. Someone or something is behind you. You slowly turn and face that bull from the street. He followed you. As your eyes meet his, he lowers his head, his sharp horns pointing at you. His right hoof begins to paw at the cobblestones. General information, author and context. Few people in world history have had as much influence as the Greek thinker Plato. One 20th century thinker famously described the history of philosophy simply as a series of footnotes to Plato, meaning Plato said all of the important stuff and everyone else was dependent upon him. You have to grasp Plato to understand so much of anything else in Western history. Plato lived from around 428 347 BC, near the end of the Golden Age of Athens, often judged to be from 480 to 430 BC. When Plato lived, Homer's writings had already held central place in Greek life. They had been written before Plato's time. When Plato was born, Herodotus had been dead for decades, and Celius, author of the Oresteia, had died less than 20 years before. Plato came from an aristocratic family in Athens, and his father is believed to have descended from the early kings of Athens. His mother may have been related to the famous Athenian lawmaker Solon, one of the men discussed in Plutarch's Lives. Early in his life, Plato had an interest in politics, statecraft, but soon he became delusioned. Perhaps this shift occurred near the time he came under the influence of his famous teacher Socrates. Socrates introduced Plato to the world of philosophy. More on philosophy below. Socrates claimed to pursue truth by means of probing questions and precise answers, and Plato picked up on this style. Socrates claimed to question about everything except pet values, and this got him into trouble with the authorities of this time, and he was finally executed in 399 BC. Plato started his famous school, the Academy, in 387 BC, a project sometimes called the First European University. There they taught such subjects as mathematics, political theory, biology, astronomy, and philosophy. It was during this later time that Plato wrote his dialogues, including one in the earliest, Euthrypo. Throughout these dialogues, Plato inserts Socrates as the key character representing, presumably, his own views as well as Plato's more developed thought. The last days of Socrates begins with the Euthrypho, which we find Socrates heading toward the Athenian court, preparing to defend himself against accusations that he has corrupted the youth of Athens. The consequences for such a charge are heady. In the second dialogue in the series, the Apology, Socrates defends himself within the Athenian court. The Apology moves along as much more by biographical monologue than less of a dialogue, but it serves as Socrates' own statement of his views and situation. The court famously finds Socrates guilty and sentences him to death. The Crito takes over. The four dialogues, the Crito is the most political. In it we find Socrates waiting in prison for his execution, sitting around with his friends. The key question of the Crito concerns civil disobedience, whether Socrates ought to obey the dictate of death and flee Athens, preserving his life. His friends argue he should, but he argues against it. Finally, with the fourth dialogue in the series, Phaedo, we get Socrates' friend Phaedo rehearsing the story of Socrates' last day, and the Socrates' execution by the poison, hemlock. Socrates resigns himself to death and even welcomes it. His friends worry and ask him to explain why he is so serene. He discusses with them why he believes in life after death. The dialogue closes with an account of Socrates' quiet death in prison. Significance. Plato wrote about 40 dialogues, and the whole collection stands out, in part because it's not a collection of histories or stories with interesting plots and characters. The dialogues are arguments, sometimes tedious arguments about ideas and definitions and rules. Some think these dialogues were used in the academy as teaching tools. Sort of like logic textbooks to show students how to argue philosophically. They became very famous over the centuries, especially as tools of argumentation. Philosophers most often characterize philosophy as the pursuit of truth, not by the standard scripture, but by means of standard given by the human mind alone. Where physics studies how matter behaves and biology studies how living things act, philosophy talks about the questions that cannot be discussed in a laboratory. The questions that need to be figured out before any subject starts. What is the truth? What counts as knowledge? What is honesty? Why should anyone tell the truth? What standards do we prove something in a lab? The Euthyphro in particular stands out because it appears to be one of the earliest of Plato's dialogues. It gives readers a good beginning sense of how both Socrates and Plato thought we ought to pursue truth. Questions, answers, definitions, and qualifications. The Phaedo stands out because it completes the four-part series as well as Socrates' life itself. Unlike many of the other dialogues, these four include just a bit more drama than usual, given the interaction with episodes in Socrates' life. But the Phaedo stands out among four because it aims to give us a dying man's thoughts. We tend to say the most important things when we know we are dying. Main characters. Most of the short Platonic dialogues, like this one, have a few speakers or interlocutors, which Socrates always getting the lead. The Euthyphro has only two characters, Socrates and the young man Euthyphro. Euthyphro comes to court to prosecute his father, a move that is highly scandalous. In the Apology, Socrates finally reaches the Athenian court, and there we learn of his accuser Metellus through the Socrates monologue. The Crito shows us Socrates in prison with his friend Crito by his side. Phaedo gives us more a mix of characters than the three previous dialogues. The Phaedo is actually a dialogue within a dialogue. The opening dialogue begins with Euthrites imploring Phaedo to tell him the story of Socrates' last day. Phaedo takes up this request, and when we hear the main dialogue, made up of mostly Socrates, Simmas, and Cebes. Summary and setting. Keeping in mind that Plato's dialogues are argument exercises, we should not expect a real plot. Readers can often get frustrated by trying to read this and other dialogues as plays. On top of that, most of Plato's dialogues are not intended to give satisfying answers. They are more concerned with the exercise of thinking than with a strong conclusion or indefinable answer. They just want to get the reader thinking along a certain pattern. In Euthyphro, we find out that the character Euthyphro, arriving at the court to do something scandalous yet apparently very progressive and etchy for the Greek mind, has come to prosecute his own father for having unintentionally killed a servant who happens to be a murderer. Euthyphro breaks with his blood relative to pursue some high standard of justice. The Apology and Crito have less of a plot than the other dialogues. The Apology just gives us Socrates defending himself before the court, and the Crito shows us a rather static dialogue between Socrates and his friend. Crito urges Socrates to flee, and Socrates gives his reasons against it. The Phaedo gives us more setting and background, explaining that Socrates' friends visit him every day during his prison wait. Usually executions were carried out swiftly, but the Greek civil celebration had delayed Socrates' execution for nearly a month. When Phaedo arrives that day, he finds Socrates' wife, Xanthippe, and his son in tearful, heartbreaking departure. Soon Socrates falls into conversation with his friends, Cebes and Simmias, who want a new defense, better than in the Apology. The dialogue closes with a description of Socrates' final moments, talking to the prison guard and friends finally drinking the poison. Worldview. Have you ever had someone boss you around? I'm not talking about parents or teachers telling you what to do. They have to. They're your parents and teachers. Sometimes, however, you might run into someone who is not an adult but still seems to know what is best for you at every turn. They know what games you should play. They know what movies you should be watched. They know how much jelly you should go on a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. The good news for you if you know someone like this is that many, I did not say all, people outgrow this sort of behavior as they mature. Even those that don't usually become more subtle about it and therefore are less bothersome. What if, however, there was a smart person who never grew out of this type of behavior, but instead had become more crafty? It might come to this point when we would say to him, when he was telling us what house we should buy, what church we should attend, "Do you think you're God?"